The topic we're trying to tackle today is, I think, perhaps one of the broadest ones that we tried to tackle. When I was doing my research, the more I was delving into it, the more I realized how expansive the topic really is. And I kind of told my wife, I said, I think that if we really wanted to do this properly from beginning to end with all the sources and kind of really delve into it in a serious way, we could even go for like multiple classes, like 4 or 5. Because it seems like it's a topic that interests us, but it's also a topic that interests the rabbis many, many years ago. What's the issue at hand? The issue at hand is kind of this balancing act of personal responsibility and God's control. Right? We're working with a certain assumption. The assumption is that the Jewish God, the definition of the Jewish God is creator, sustainer, and supervisor. And not only did God create, but He sustains, which means it's not like He created and went off to the cosmos to do other things. You know, that's a theology that's antithetical to Judaism. He created, but is still sustaining. Right? If God were to seize, this is the first page of Maimonides, which I actually brought today because I thought we might actually use. First page of Maimonides says, if God were to seize. Right? Or, obviously, it's an impossibility. But if that were to happen, then everything which is dependent upon God were to cease as well. It's kind of like if you pull the lamp out of the outlet, it doesn't have that flow of electricity. It's not going to work. You know, that's kind of what we are, but not just us. All of humanity, all of living things in the whole world, everything. You know, we're all kind of living off God's nourishment, so to speak. And the last kind of element of our definition of God, or the simplistic definition of God, is that God supervises as well, which means that God's involved with us on an individual level. This is the thing that a lot of people, or a lot of scientists, the great scientists, that will conclude that the complexity of the universe, right, mandates a certain intelligent design to it. There are a lot of scientists that will readily admit to that. It's too complex, it's too perfect, it's too organized. You take a look at the brain, right? The brain we're talking about trillions of neurons just intersecting. It's all perfect. It's this machine that we can't even grasp how complex it is. It's got to have some sort of designer. And that's just in our brain, in our little box, little cranium here. But once you expand that to the whole universe, into the cosmos, into everything being so perfectly organized, we have to have had some designer. That's a conclusion a lot of people are willing to draw. However, this Jewish God who relates to us, who communicates with man, who gives us a Torah, who speaks to the prophets, right? But who cares about us as individuals, who we could pray to, and that making some sort of impact, a supervising God, that's somehow a leap too far to jump. Because this God who's capable of such grandiose things, why would He care about pity humans? So the third element that we say about God on the simplistic definition of God, creator, sustainer, supervisor, is that God supervises us as an individual. Hence, right, if we pray, right, God can hear us. That's the very elementary aspect of Judaism, is that we could relate to God. God gives us a Torah, right? God wants us to have a good life, right? God loves us like a father. And our actions matter as well. So all things intersect with this idea of God supervising us. But additionally, we say that kind of God has a plan for us. Right? God gives us a mission. We're told that B'shvili nivra olam, everyone has to say that the world was created for me. I have responsibilities. Right? Not only on a collective or national scale, the Jewish people have what we call the mission of Tikkun Olam. We spoke about that once. Collectively, we have kind of a vision of what we're supposed to accomplish as a nation, but individually as well. We have a mission that we're supposed to accomplish as well, and our tools in our tool set were specifically designed for us individually to help us accomplish what we need to. So we're talking about a God, we're describing a God that is involved in the most minute aspects of us individually. We call this hashgacha pratit, which means individual supervision. If I do something, it matters, right? doesn't change God, of course. I don't want to get into that philosophical discussion. God isn't impacted, right? But it matters. Okay, so that's the background of our discussion. Now, for us, like, God gives us a lot of kind of He makes it easier for us to wrap our head around this by giving us all like stamps of like we're all individuals, you know. There's so much about us with our DNA. We're very highly individualized entities. We all have a different perspective on life. Right? Every two people, there's no two people in the world that agree on everything. It's not possible. Right? Everyone has their own way of looking at things. Everyone looks different. Everyone has a different voice. This thing about it, there's billions of people in the world, and they don't all sound the same. It's just remarkable. Yeah. What's the joke?
No, I always think it's remarkable how you can hear one or two words or syllables and know who's
it's remarkable.
Who's talking.
Yeah, and the Talmud points out, says, there's a very interesting string of Talmudic statements in Sanhedrin. But one of the things, and it talks about this particular point, that no two people look alike. Remarkable. Think about that. Try crafting 8 billion faces, and each one of them is different. And remarkably different that they're distinguishable from each other. Every single one. Right? It's God's handiwork saying, you're an individual. You're an individual. You're not just like everyone else. You're not just some sort of puppet. You have a mission. You have responsibilities. You're unique. So that's the backdrop of our discussion. So we have this individualized relationship with God. He has a plan for us. And He's involved. He's involved with every aspect of our lives. On one hand. On the other hand, we have responsibilities. Right? As an individual, right, from our perspective, so to speak, we have to do things. We have to have a job. We have to have a family. We have to have personal responsibility. We have to be involved in a community. Right? And we kind of have these two elements where, on one hand, God kind of is mapping out our lives. On the other hand, we're kind of blazing our own trail in life on a big scale and an individual scale as well. We make decisions all the time. Right? What's the impact of our decisions? Right? How much is predetermined, and how much is kind of is up for change? So obviously, we could tell it's a very, very big and broad topic. And what I wanted to do is kind of give, like, by way of introduction, what I just randomly thought of, like 5 different questions that we could have about this. This means kind of make this more real by trying to view it in light of a certain, let's say, quandary that we may have. So, if we believe that God is supervising us individually, and if I live or if I die, it's in His hands. And what happens to me if I, God forbid, get cancer or get hit by a truck, it's in His hands. Right? It's in His hands. No one here knows, even the healthiest person. You don't know you don't know. We're feeble. We're in the hands of the Almighty. Okay, if so, do I have anything to lose by walking into a highway blindfolded? What do you think? Is it a legitimate question or not?
It's not a legitimate question.
Why not?
No, for heaven's sakes. We know better than to walk on a highway with a blindfold on.
Okay, so if we know better.
And the man has already told you before, don't do that because you can see what happened to you. I mean, you have examples all the time of idiots getting run over and stuff like that, So.
On one hand, given us the knowledge not to go to dangerous places.
Okay, so we're saying it's illegitimate. It's not a legitimate question because, yes, like you guys are basically saying the same thing. God gave us the intelligence and the understanding that if we do dangerous things can happen to us. But what you're really saying is that I could really interfere with God's plan for me. Right? I can interfere. God says, listen, this guy, I want him to live 70 years. I want him to accomplish this. I want him to have this kind of family. That's what I expect of him. Right? Now, what this guy is going to do by living maybe a more dangerous lifestyle, they could interfere with that and say, no, you're going to die when you're 17 crossing the highway blindfolded. So I agree that you're right, but I want to just extrapolate from that kind of what that means. That means that man has the ability to interfere with God's plans for him.
But then you could say that God really had that plan for him to begin with, and he's just following that plan.
Okay, so
That you could believe that.
And you could blame it on teenage infants' ability.
Yes.
When teenagers are teenagers, they don't yet, in my mind's eye, fully grasp, because they're not in their 20s and logic has not yet formally developed in a teenager. He doesn't yet get the grasp.
They still feel they're immortal.
They do feel
yeah.
they're immortal, and they do like to tempt fate.
Yes.
And I think part of that is the process.
have a death wish.
Well, they don't yet
I don't think
understand
so.
their
Some
own
people do.
their own power and their own decision-making skills.
Okay, so
You're going to beat the
it seems like everyone seems to agree, but I want to impress upon us that this is a major state. I agree they're all right, and we'll go to some of the sources that seem to indicate that. But and your point kind of could make this ties into pretzel. Your point.
I forgot my point already.
Yeah.
Here's God sitting up there in the seat, and he knows everything as it begins, and he knows how it's going to end.
Now I remember.
And he's probably saying, here's what I want John to do, but that dork's going to walk out on the freeway and get run over.
Yeah. So
Why can't he supervise and do something like that? Say, don't do that, idiot.
And God
well, maybe
does
he
it.
did by
He
giving you
did.
some intelligence, like you yourself said. You yourself said, "Hey,
Just
God
not
gives you
maybe
the knowledge,
listening to what he's telling
and
you.
you know,
But
and
God intervenes all the time when we make stupid choices.
Is that true? Oh, you believe that?
Oh, clearly.
Oh, okay. 'Cause
to
I
save.
don't.
Okay, the question is also: is stupid choices the same thing as negligent choices? Making the wrong decision.
It's a matter of perspective, because they both do not
It's
influence
nice to
each other.
believe that.
And I think God does have compassion, and I think
Okay, so
he
let's
does see-
try to dig into some sources. But first, I have a few more questions here. Listen to this one, guys. If someone gets sick, so we all know someone who's sick. We live in the biggest medical center of the world. Tons of time you see people coming in here. They have, God forbid, diseases, and it's really sad. But who made him sick?
It could have been an issue of genetics.
Yes.
It could be an
Okay.
issue
Okay.
of
But remember.
He's talking on a religious basis.
All right, but we're working with that backdrop,
Yeah, yeah.
right? If someone gets sick, it's God who made them sick, right?
No.
Or God enabled them to become sick, right? God
Well, you
allowed
can
it
say
to happen.
that because you have the
Allowed it to
bacteria and the
happen.
viruses and all these other things are there. If he put them there, so then
It allows it to happen.
He allows it to
It's-
happen.
Yeah.
he
we
may,
can say
he
allows
may
it to
not
happen.
have pointed his finger.
So,
but,
someone, let's say, going to seek medical attention, or let's talk about it on a different level. Someone praying to God to grant someone a healing. Is that trying to interfere with God? Or we have part of our prayers, the Amidah prayer every day, multiple times. We have the prayer for health. And we say that if God, if someone's sick, please God, please God grant them a refuah shlema, a complete recovery. What are we doing? Right? Perhaps God is saying, listen, someone is sick, and I made him sick. I think maybe he should die because that's what I decided. And who are we to say, you know what? We think maybe it's better that he lives. Right? Are we once again interfering with what God is doing for us? Should we not go to the doctor, or should we not pray, or should we? Well, clearly we should pray because that's part of the prayer.
I don't think it's interfering with God. I think he's going to go on and do what he wants to do.
We've been
I
given
think that it's okay to pray. I mean, it's God's will anyway, and he knows and expects us to pray for those people. But he's still going to do what he's going to do. But it's expected of us.
Well, it's
Interference is active.
well, why pray though?
Prayer
if-
is asking nicely.
Yeah, but why pray if you know that you're not going to, by prayer, you're not
Maybe
going to
you
change
change-
the outcome?
You change his mind.
But you could very well
Don't
change
know
the
that.
outcome.
If it is up to God.
But it's about the partnership that we have with
With
God
God,
in
yeah.
perfecting our world.
Partnership.
What did I say?
I like that word.
That's a good word. That's a good word.
And I would like to add that everything that happens in life is opportunities for us to act godly. And what is one of the things that he wants to do is care for the sick. So if there were no sick, then we wouldn't have the opportunity to care for the
So
sick.
you're looking at it from the
From a
perspective
different way.
of it's not about what actually can happen with this opportunity for everyone else to.
Yeah, it's like if everyone was rich, no one would have the opportunity to give tzedakah.
You know who says that? Those words, word for word, Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva was asked the question of why does God make poor people? And he says because otherwise there wouldn't be any merit for the other people to try to help them.
I think the same thing.
So, I mean, this whole thing has to do with if everything is predetermined.
No, I never said anything predetermined.
Well, wait, if you say if God had
God has a
control over
plan.
it-
I didn't say it's
No,
predetermined.
no,
Clearly,
but
it's not. Oh well, maybe it is.
predetermined versus you have your own free choice,
Or how
at
do,
least
what's
can
the
intervene.
interplay? What's
Yeah,
the interplay?
right,
I don't want to look at it. I don't think that it has to be that cut and dried. Where it's some other questions here. If someone is, let's say, has a high cholesterol and is overweight or is obese, and all they want to do is just eat steak. I personally know someone like this, and they take literally like $100 worth of meat, kosher meat, and no, because $100 of
it's all
kosher
that
meat.
salt that's in there.
$100 of kosher meat is a lot less meat than $100 of non-kosher meat. So, and he just I saw this guy like he's just guzzling steaks, and could he legitimately say, "Listen, if God wants me to die, I'll die. If God doesn't want me to die, I won't die. And my actions have no bearing on that."
But a lot of people think
are we
that
saying,
way.
well, yes. The question is, what's the legitimacy of that? Can someone endanger themselves, not necessarily by walking through a freeway where there's imminent danger, but more like a long-term danger where, yes, this one bite of meat is not necessarily going to directly contribute to...
Maybe it's all part of God's plan. He needed to go through this process and then have a health challenge to recognize how precarious our health is and indeed how valuable it is.
Or-
we learn through the process
Yeah,
of
I
experience.
mean, what you're saying is that he is presented with his particular free will choice, where he has to engage with this kind of, let's say, conflict, and this is his room for his growth.
And it's also room for our growth because we are going to benefit through the lens of his experience as well.
And we can learn from him as well.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Everything is a mirror back to us.
The food things, it's interesting how some of the treatments or whatever they change over time.
Yeah.
It's not a static thing. When I started in training a few years ago, cholesterol was a big thing. Then it died out for a long time. Then it came back in. You had to have this number and that number. Now all of a sudden, the latest is the LDL, and the LDL needed to be 100. Now 80. Now they want it to be say low density lipoprotein, the bad cholesterol.
That's the problem. We get so much information. This week is as good, next week is not.
Yeah, well,
It's like coffee. Every week you hear a different story about it.
The other thing, when I was in training, heparin, which is a blood thinner, used to be the thing. You had an acute stroke, you put the people on heparin, and then it died out, then it's on again. Then we were using intravenous heparin. Now it's out the window for almost all things.
The point is we don't necessarily know what the right way is.
Yeah, that's you got.
Yeah,
it.
but we know for sure, some things we know for sure, like that are deleterious to your health.
Yeah.
Either way, I want to give a few more examples. Well, let's say one more example here of. I think this is maybe much more of a practical. It's a very big political issue in Israel right now. I don't know if you guys are aware, but in Israel is the only country out of 212 countries in the United Nations that has mandatory conscription of women. The only country in the world.
Right.
Yeah.
Men as well, obviously, but everyone in Israel is obligated, mandatory, to conscript in the army at the age of 18. My dad grew up in Israel, and he went to army when he was 18. Now, in the 1950s, there was an agreement that was hatched amongst between the yeshivas, which is like the Torah, basically universities, and the army, that they are exempt. They get an exemption because they're studying Torah. And at that time, it was about like 400 or 500 students in yeshiva, and that number has just grown exponentially. Now there's like more than 100,000 Israelis that are in yeshiva and not in the army. So now it's a very, very hot political issue in Israel today, where what they call it the status quo, which is what's been around for 60 years. They want to change it. They want to make that everyone has to go, including yeshiva students, and maybe reduce the amount of exemptions. I think that this debate or our discussion today kind of really is kind of what the political argument's all about. On one hand, we have this. We say that yes, Torah study is crucial to Jewish people, and it saves lives as well. You know, that the merit of the scholars that are just, you know, toiling away in Torah. On the other hand, you have, you know, physical threats that the nation is facing, and it's real, and they may or may not need more soldiers. If they even need more soldiers, and there's an imminent threat of life, then, you know, we should close all the books and go fight. You know, even during the, you know, the times of you know, the biblical times, everyone went to war. It was a war of a mitzvah, so everyone went, including the scholars, including everyone else.
In '67, it was a whole bunch of Israeli paratrooper ladies that run the Egyptians off in a critical battle.
Yeah, well, they didn't have the air support, so... Well, they had the air support.
Listen, you don't need air support when them wild women come down there.
Yeah, well...
I thought I read something toward that, like, during times when, that they would split into thirds. A third would pray, a third would do supplies, and a third would go into combat.
Well, I think you might be referring to, in next week's Parsha, where Jacob is preparing for battle with his brother Esau, and he does three things. He does prayer, he does prayer, battle, and what? What was the third one?
Oh, this is where Moses, and they had to go into.
Everyone went into battle at times Moses, besides for the tribe of Levi.
I thought, yeah, one person stood back to pray for each person in battle. I thought that's where the whole thing when Israel came about was from that parsha.
I believe everyone went to battle besides for the tribe of Levi.
Okay.
Tribal
Levi, there's one of the tribes because they were always the spiritual, you know, dedicated to spiritual activities.
Okay.
Well, I mean,
So
we
the
had
question is-
conscientious objectors in the United States. We during the Second World War and afterwards, people didn't go to war if they were conscientious, objected to
and
war.
they were ostracized for it.
But it
They
is-
They were
were.
called draft dodgers.
Well, you
Yeah.
had Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay.
That's true. That's true.
Non-combat
That's true.
role.
That's true. The majority of all
Yes.
Israeli soldiers are non-combat.
I believe
Same
in
could be
service
true
for
those
everybody.
with-
Yeah, well, I'm not trying. I'm just trying to. I don't want to get into the political discussion
Right.
because there's a lot of different perspectives on it, and there's a lot of different realities. You know, it costs more than $1 million for the IAF, which is the Israeli Air Force, to train a single pilot.
Yeah, same.
More than $1 million. The question
Right.
is that kind of expenditure is that necessary for, let's say, a group? You know, for this group do they actually need that? I mean, do they need to invest that? And that's one perspective that they made, that the yeshiva proponents would argue and say, listen, you're investing this, but you don't really need it. You have plenty of soldiers. On the other hand, I think it's legitimate to say, hey, why should the people that are not yeshiva, why should they be the only ones risking their lives in combat and not the ones in yeshiva? But I'm saying there's so many different perspectives back and forth.
Are there people in Israel that specifically go to the yeshiva to stay away from war?
Yeah,
like
so
they
then
did in the
there's-
States?
yes, that's, of course. You know, my father. Okay, this is an example. My grandfather had a yeshiva. Okay, and my father was also in a yeshiva at the age of 18, but he wasn't so interested. You know, we didn't have the kind of patience to sit and study.
Right.
So he went to my grandfather and said to him, you know, would you mind putting me in your yeshiva so I could get an exemption? You know, kind of gaming the system. He said, absolutely not. And he went to the army. He was in the army for 4 years. You know, it used to be 4 years, now it's only 3 years. You know, so yes, is there, you know, fraud in the system? Yes. I think that's the first thing that they should do, is make sure that all the people that are actually getting the exemptions are actually studying. You know, I think that would gain them a lot of manpower.
See,
Either way, but I think that the question exists. Could we say, hey, we're going to engage in spiritual activities, we're going to study Torah, and if we study Torah, we're doing our fair share to contribute to Israel's plight? Or we could say, no, we have to take more like a personal responsibility perspective, and you know, and make the kind of physical contributions to the security of the state. I think it's a legitimate argument, and it's a very, very contemporary one. Very.
well, now look, it is one time when it looked like Israel was going to get swamped by these Arabs. I think it was under Nasser at that time.
Yep.
Every woman went out there and got themselves a birth control pill. What do you suppose that could happen if they knew how to use an Uzi?
Are you suggesting that women are highly complex and capable?
Well, they didn't get the birth control pills in 56. It wasn't any. They didn't come out there around 61.
Okay, so so that's kind of what I think the kind of different layers, different realms we have this discussion. I want to stress this, and I cannot stress this enough. I don't believe that I'm not going to try to make any conclusions. I'm just going to try to present the material. Because I think that there's a lot of delicate balances here, like we say. There's a lot of there's room for kind of maneuvering within the sources themselves, because you have a lot of kind of perspectives on both sides of the issue in multiple different realms. I'm not going to try to make any conclusions. We're trying to have the discussion from a source-based background. So let's start by talking about kind of what Bernie brought up. The idea of something being predetermined. Is it possible that even if something is predetermined, it's still negotiable? There's still room for change. Our actions can still have bearing on the outcome. So I found this fantastic clash of the Talmuds in the same book called Nida. It's the very last book in the entire Talmud. And on 16b, we find the following statement. If y'all remember, when I gave a class right, this table was sitting right over here, and we talked about all the things that the Talmud says of what happens to a child before they're conceived.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. They had the Torah.
Yeah, well, very interesting. So we find there's another statement here that talks about this angel who's called Lila. Not Lilith, Lila. There's this angel, and the angel's responsibility is conception, and it takes the drop. Right, the drop is a reference to sperm, and presents it in front of God and says to God, what's going to be in this drop? Tipazu matehela. Will it be a mighty, strong, or weak, or feeble? Will it be wealthy or poor? Will it be wise, intelligent, or foolish? Chacham or tipesh. However, it does not ask, the angel does not ask, will it be a tzaddik, a righteous person, or a rasha, a wicked person? And on that, the Talmud concludes, from here we know, Hakol b'yedei shamayim, chutz miyirat shamayim. Everything is in the hands of heaven, aside from fear of heaven. This is something that's repeated in several places in the Talmud. Everything is determined kind of by heaven. Right? Will you be rich or poor? Will you be strong or weak? Will you be wise or foolish? Those things are all predetermined. Kind of your DNA is basically, you did nothing to change it. However, what you do with that, should you be righteous or wicked, that's in your hands. All's in the hands of heaven, aside from fear of heaven. So what do we see? We see clearly that, let's say, someone's financial state is kind of predetermined. Before you were born, it was already decided if you're going to be wealthy or poor. Seemingly, it's predetermined. Fast forward to the same book, 70b. Right? So we had 16b, now 70b. It says as follows. Talmud asks a question. What should a person do and become wealthy? It actually has three discussions. What should a person do and become wise, become intelligent? What should a person do and become wealthy? And lastly, what should a person do and have male sons versus female sons? It gives some techniques, very interesting, of how a person kind of could try to maneuver and have male sons versus female children. Either way, the Talmud asks, what should a person do to become wealthy? So it says like this, gives the instructions. He should increase in commerce, do a lot of commerce, and do business with integrity. Be honest in business. Two things, right? Do a lot of business, a lot of commerce. This doesn't say business, commerce. And do business, be honest. Be honest. Do business with integrity. So the Talmud says, wait a minute. A lot of people tried that. And they weren't successful. A lot of people tried. They tried to do business, lots of commerce. They were busy all day. And they did it with integrity, they were honest, and they weren't successful. Rather, the Talmud says you should ask from he who the wealth is his. Who's that? That's the Almighty. Why? As it says, for the silver and the gold is mine, says God. First, we have in the Bible. God is he has all the wealth, he's the billionaire dad, and you should ask from him. So if so, why do you need to tell me the first instruction of do a lot of commerce, and do business with integrity? Because one without the other is not possible. You have to have both. So the conclusion of that Talmud, 70b in Nida, is that there is a roadmap to become wealthy. Number one, do a lot of commerce. Don't waste your time with anything else. Do a lot of commerce, do business with integrity. And lastly, seek mercy or pray from he who has all the gold and silver, which is God. 3 things. Very simple.
Say thanks.
Okay, as well. What do we see? That there is a map, there is a way to become wealthy. You told me only, 54 pages earlier, you told me that there's no way to, it's predetermined if you'll be wealthy or poor. And now later on it says, no, there's a roadmap to becoming wealthy. This is a major question. What's going on? What's going on? Legitimate? Mm-hmm. So I found in the commentaries, they jump on it, and they said as follows. Even though something may be predetermined, man can influence that. And if you have a concerted effort, and you're diligent, and you combine that with prayer, you can overturn it. Even though something there's a plan for it, right? You're destined to be middle class, upper middle class, right? With hard work, determination, drive, right? Kind of investing what we call personal responsibility, right? Your individual contribution, so to speak. Couple that with prayer, then you'll become wealthy. You'll become wealthy, right? Hard work pays off. Hence, what we see is that I'm trying to mitigate the idea. Like, even if we think something is predetermined, it is. Well, that's kind of the way it would be unless something changes. We, like you mentioned, the word I liked the most was we could partner with God. We have a say in the matter. Our actions matter. Our actions can bear fruit.
And we have evidence of God changing his mind.
Where's that?
I was thinking of several different times where people have talked with God and tried to change things. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Abraham, when he was trying to save Sodom and Gomorrah, that didn't necessarily work, but God was willing. But there wasn't the right number of people. But there's several instances.
So you say not only do our actions matter, but even we could kind of change God's kind of.
changes his mind several
It is
times.
possible.
Yeah, but usually that would be only for the good.
Right.
Yeah,
If God,
there was
Right.
one king, I forgot his name, where God sent the prophet and told him to get his house ready because he was going to
He
die.
was going to die, that's
Yes.
right.
And then
everybody
prayed,
sackcloth,
and
sackcloth, and they did this.
he lived more years.
so that's another example where God may say, unless something changes, it's going to be X, but humans have the ability, and God trusts us. Right? God gives us the power with our with our free will, means the ability to decide what we're going to do to make an impact, which is a very important thing. Kind of before we get a little deeper into the matter, is that yes, even if we say that God has total dominion and God is total, and there is a plan for everyone, and there is a roadmap that we're supposed to trace, still we can change that.
But nothing happens until we take ownership that we think something different should be. If we just shut up and row, then things would develop as they develop. It is only our desire for change, and hopefully through the change something better, that anything ever does change.
Yeah, but what I'm trying, yeah, that's right, but that creates this joint effort where yes, there is some sort of plan for us, but our actions may have an impact on that as well, and we're not just receptive or passive and say whatever God does to me, that's what it'll be. Okay, let's tiptoe a little further into the discussion. In a few weeks, we're going to read about Joseph. Right, this week's parsha is Vayetze. So we just had the stories of Jacob and Esau, and the clash of the brothers, and now Jacob kind of siphons or surreptitiously steals the blessings, and Esau is out for him, and now he's running away. He's out. He's going east, going to Haran, and the whole episodes of Jacob and the developing of his family is going to begin. But in a few weeks, we're going to read about Joseph. Joseph, the tragic story, or at least that began tragically, of him having this kind of tortured relationship with his brothers, being, the favorite of the dad, and eventually being sold off into slavery in Egypt, being seduced by his master's wife. Everyone remembers that story? Huh?
Isn't that Potiphar's wife?
Potiphar's wife, excellent. And then he ends up in prison. And he's languishing in prison when he is joined in his cell, if we can even say that, by two of Pharaoh's servants, right? The cupbearer and the baker. And they each have a dream. The story, each have a dream. Everyone remembers this?
Yes.
They each have a dream, and they're all flustered by the dream, and Joseph interprets the dream. And he tells the baker that, you had the 3 loaves of bread on your head, and the birds were picking from the top loaf, and that means that in 3 days, and to be Pharaoh's birthday, and he's going to decide to kill you. And then he tells the cupbearer, the butler of Pharaoh, that also the 3 vines is 3 days, and in 3 days you're going to be serving Pharaoh. Pharaoh's going to reinstate you. Fine. And then he pleads his case to the cupbearer and tells him, please, when you get freed, convince Pharaoh to free me, because I was here, I was wrongly accused, I'm innocent, I was kidnapped from my family. Do your effort to try to intervene on my behalf. I should be granted freedom. And the last verse of the parsha says that what actually he predicted as the interpretation of the dreams happened. Right? 3 days later was Pharaoh's birthday. He took the baker and he executed them, and he reinstated the cupbearer. And the cupbearer did not remember Joseph, and he forgot him. And then it's 2 years later, and then Pharaoh had his dreams, and eventually Joseph is extricated. So the Midrash, when we say Midrash is a Talmudic era teaching from the authors of the Talmud, but not necessarily one that was included in the Talmud, even though some Midrashes are indeed included in the Talmud. The Midrash says that the reason why Joseph had to spend another 2 years in captivity was because he relied on the cupbearer. He told the cupbearer, when you get out, talk to Pharaoh, and convince him and tell him that I was here, to tell him that I was placed in captivity, and tell him that I'm here innocently, and try to convince him to let me go. He relied on the cupbearer, and instead of relying on God.
Yeah.
That's what it says. What does it indicate? Right? Joseph is held accountable and is punished for doing what we would think is the most rudimentary self-reliance or personal responsibility. Right? If you are placed in captivity wrongly, you should do everything that you can to get out. If you know someone is about to go out to freedom, who's going to be in Pharaoh's room every day, doesn't it seem logical or reasonable that you should try to tell them, listen, I'm here illegally, try to help me. We're pals. I interpreted your dream. You see that I'm not just another dude. I'm put together, intelligent. The verses say earlier that he was running the entire operations. Kind of like Andy Dufresne, and we see that he's punished. So this should give us pause. When we are just so quick to argue that, no, you have to do everything you can, we see that Joseph was punished. Now, I want to make a quick disclaimer. Joseph and Jacob and all Jacob's kids and all those people talking about in the times of the Bible, these are people that are way beyond us in their spiritual capacity and spiritual awareness. So what Joseph is held accountable for is something that for us could be a mitzvah. So whatever we're saying about Joseph is Joseph on his level. And we'll see that this will come into play a little bit later when we see that that the proper balance of these two elements depends on who you are as a spiritual being. For Joseph, on his level, any sort of reliance on any man, to him it was some sort of flaw in his faith. For him, on his level, it was a flaw in his faith. For us, I don't believe it would be. But the idea is certainly true, that when someone has that heightened level of faith, to them they have to just solely rely on God. Solely rely on God. Don't try to come up with these clever ways to try to circumvent God and say, oh, maybe this guy can help me. He'll help me get out of here.
And why did he bother to interpret those dreams?
Oh, maybe because for who?
For those two fellas.
Well, I'm saying because that's kindness. You see two people that are just going nuts to have this dream, and they know it's significant, but they have no idea what to do. That's for sure the right thing to do. But he shouldn't have said, you're going to be going free. Like, this is a ticket to freedom for me, maybe, without, kind of letting God, you rely on God, you don't need to worry about that.
May
Yes.
I just take a very short segue on something?
Yes.
Joseph was so far advanced spiritually
Yes.
than we are modern times.
Yes.
And, is it like a generalization? What about great rabbis, great philosophers who live in our days? What about Maimonides? Would he be also less advanced than Joseph? Would it be a mitzvah for him to try to get out of whatever jail he might have gotten in his time 1,000 years ago? Well,
Yes, so we have this idea that's ubiquitous in Jewish philosophy that's called Yeridat Dorot. You heard of that? Yeridat Dorot, which means the degradation of generations. Which means that as generations progress, you get further away from prophecy, you get further away from Sinai, you get further away from Abraham, you get further away from the great spirituality and more kind of enmeshed in physicality, and it kind of becomes harder for us to have that same sensitivity to spiritual things that they had. So yes, certainly Maimonides lives 1,000 years ago and towered above his peers, is someone that kind of bucked that trend. Even though he came 1,000 years after the Talmud, but he did things that no one did. He was a tremendous genius, and obviously we know, it's just an unrivaled genius, and who just accomplished so much, and whose name is etched into the Jewish psyche for forever. But was he at the level of Joseph? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Now, it's important to say that, to point out that, I don't know if I gave this example. Did I give this example about I don't think I gave this example. We look at the capacity of individuals to be almost kind of a reflection of the capacity of society. So, in our history classes, we're talking about the cessation of prophecy. No one could become a prophet. Right? Even Rabbi Akiva came only 300-400 years after the prophecy period had ended. He was incapable of prophecy. Why? Is that because he individually was not remarkable enough? No. Moses foresaw Rabbi Akiva and said, the Torah should be given via him. Clearly, he was someone that, on an individual level, personally, was one who's capable of prophecy. Point is that the society was not meritorious to the level of being capable of having a prophet amongst them. So someone once gave the example of if you have a light bulb that's 15 feet in the air, if this roof was 15, if this ceiling was 15 feet in the air, even the tallest, even Hakeem Olajuwon, who's 7'2", he still can't change the light bulb. Right? Because to change a 15-foot light bulb, no matter regardless how tall you are, if the light bulb is 15 feet in the air, you won't be able to change it unless you're standing on something. So no matter how great the individual is, they won't have that same capacities unless they're standing, so to speak, on the shoulders of the nation. And if the nation is one that is capable of having that level of greatness amongst them, well, then that person has that expanded opportunity and is able to maybe reach the higher levels.
But even though I'm not sure I wrap my head around that they had higher spirituality in biblical times, that does not resonate with me. But even though that is so, they still had very human qualities and failings. Jacob was a master of deceit. He turns out to be on the receiving end of a masterful deceit. Jacob is hoisted on his own petard with his coat of many colors, for which at one time Joseph was, yes, he has this coat of many colors that is his pride and joy, and it is Potiphar's wife that identifies him by that coat of many colors. So I'm not sure I go there with
but remember, someone's personal failings
Make them
being
human.
absolutely. We never claim, this is a very important point, even Moses, the greatest man that ever lived, is the most castigated individual of the Torah.
Right.
Because, and that's, I think, the lesson, the Torah telling us so much of his flaws is to hammer home this idea that we don't deify people, no matter how great they are, and we don't ascribe any divine qualities to any human. We don't. That's very important.
Well, if those brothers were so advanced, why did they sell their brother off?
Indeed, not only that, but what they did to the people who raped Dinah. Judah is even held to account that he did not take personal responsibility at a time in which he could have. And Simon, he was not a nice man. What he was able to lead that band of brothers to do.
Why don't you clarify? Because he's saying
My.
you're equating him saying that Jews were more spiritual, or higher level of faith with personal, without having character flaws, which I think those two
I
things
don't
can be
see the higher
different, right?
level of faith
Yes.
in them.
I'm
missing that.
Well, faith may have played a more important part in their lives. They had a lot less things going on in their
And
lives
still
in
they
those
were
days.
capable of doing dastardly deeds.
Dastardly, nice
Well,
word.
still,
I think there's a few points here. Okay. I think point number one, and I think you guys might,
disagree.
yeah, I think you certainly will, is that we cannot read the stories of the Torah on a simplistic level. Not to mean that they weren't literal, and I do believe that Simon and Levi slaughtered the whole town. Yes, but it's not shouldn't have been on a simplistic level. That's number one. I'm not trying to justify them when the Torah doesn't justify them. Right? The Torah calls them out. Jacob calls them out.
Indeed.
And they had some flaws. And also, number two, someone having flaws does not necessarily take away from their heightened spiritual awareness. And in fact, the opposite is true.
But if they had a heightened spiritual awareness, why would they go to
I
that
think that they went specifically there because of their heightened spiritual awareness. To them, a spiritual malady of the magnitude that would allow someone to go, brutally rape their sister is something which is so, is so evil that has to be eradicated. Means I'm trying to turn the tables here. I'm trying to say that yes, because of the heightened spiritual awareness, they acted in a way which is maybe a little bit not so grounded, we would say. But I think the third point that I want to say is that we mentioned this once before, multiple times before, that the Talmud declares that the greater a person is, the higher the level of conflict with their Yetzer Hara, with their temptations. So yes, if someone has temptations, of course they're going to have temptations. In fact, they're going to be much higher than ours because they're that much greater than us.
But my point being, these aren't small slips.
I'm not going to challenge
And they
that.
have.
I'm not going to challenge that.
The
But
Torah
remember,
does not tell us
these
that
are
they
people.
have these internal wrestlings for selling their brother, putting him in a pit. And I do not remember reading that they have this internal angst for years over it.
Okay, so but remember that might be a simplistic way of reading it. If you open up some of the commentaries, they have these great debates as to what was the legitimacy of this decision to do that. Originally, there were those that said, let's put him down. Remember that? It says, one brother said to the other, which whenever time it says brothers, it's always referring to those who have this brotherly, which is Shimon and Levi, Simon and Levi, because they were the ones that felt this
Hatred of him.
well, this hatred, but that was based upon, they're the ones who slaughtered the town because it infringed or because they encroached on their family, so to speak.
Yes.
They went nuts with family. So yes, there was this, they had a desire at some point to put him down. What's the legitimacy of that? There's great discussion about it. I'm not saying that they were justified, but the point is that it wasn't mindless. It wasn't that they were mindless savages. Okay, but either way, this is an idea that we find everywhere that the individuals of biblical times had a much greater spiritual sensitivity than we have.
So is it because God slowly, with this successive generation, historical period, withdraws a bit of
No, they get.
potential spirituality?
I don't think it's. I don't want to blame God. I want to. I think
Oh,
it's.
it's not
Just,
blame. Maybe it's a plan. Who knows?
I think it's a result of kind of the longer we're here on Earth, the longer we have kind of an earthly centric view, a physical centric view of life, and the further we are away from God kind of interfering with us on an individual level, the further we are from prophecy. That's just the regression is natural. Regression is very natural when you are further and further away from, let's say, Sinai, from the great sages of the Talmud, further away from the forefathers, further away from Adam and Eve, kind of being direct recipients of God's handiwork.
So if we are going to be partners with God in the perfection of our world, which is what we talked about, was our mission for even incarnating into these lives, then it seems to me that the job is going to be more challenging with each successive generation.
Or it's cumulative. So whatever efforts previous generations have contributed, our comparatively minor, well, it's cumulative. So if they did 99.9% of the job, we have that just 1/1000th left. That us, much smaller beings, kind of contribute in that sense. So yes, comparatively our contributions are going to be little, but the culmination of all the contributions together are going to culminate in something very grand. Either way, we see Joseph is taken to task by his lack of faith. Now, I want to point out the commentaries on the Torah have a very, very, very heated discussion as to how could we claim that Joseph had a lapse in faith? Had he relied on the butler, on the cupbearer? So I found this really interesting perspective from the Rabbeinu Bachai, who is a 13th century scholar. He says like this. He kind of gives us some sort of middle ground. He said he didn't rely on the cupbearer. Rather, his lapse was that he assumed that it was his job to find the solution. Not only was it he relied on God, but he said, you know what? I'm going to try to actually find the solution myself. And obviously, God is going to make sure that it's going to happen. But but he didn't lend his entire reliance on the cupbearer. And then, according to that, the flaw in his faith was that he should have relied on God completely, not just for the idea of the redemption, but also for how it's going to happen. It kind of reminds me of the joke that this guy was late for a meeting, and he was driving in Brooklyn, and Brooklyn is notorious for a lot of things, but one of them is for no parking. So he's making circles around, no parking. He's, God, I need this interview. I need it. It starts in 2 minutes. Give me a parking spot. Give me a parking. Praise out the guy, give me a parking spot. And then, lo and behold, the guy pulls out right in front of him. He's like, yeah, scratch that. I got it. Scratch that. I got it. So yes, we kind of, our relationship with God and God kind of intervening with us is, yes, on kind of the macro, but also on the individual, and that's where Joseph, according to Ben Machai, where his flaw. Another example from textual, from Jewish literature, where you find that not having total reliance on God is some sort of flaw in your faith, is what we find in the Talmud, in the Mishnah of the Talmud, at the end of Tractate Sota. It says as follows. It's talking about the kind of the degradation of the generations, like we mentioned. So it says that when the temple was destroyed, in the year, what year was the temple destroyed? In the year 70 of the Common Era, when the temple was destroyed, men of faith ceased. Right? It says when that happened, then kind of that was really the last times you had people of faith. So the Talmud says, what does it mean, man of faith? What does that mean?
Well, they were faithless to begin with before the temple was destroyed. That's why God destroyed.
Well, okay, maybe even
and all that.
Individuals of faith, whatever, not just collective rejection of faith.
The rabbis themselves were the culprits. They poisoned the whole place up there. That's why the temple was destroyed, because it was going into idol worship and the whole 9 yards.
Well, we're talking about the first temple, second temple.
Second temple.
Okay, the background of the second temple is the Talmud says is that it's because of sinat chinam, of needless or hatred, Jews amongst Jews. But hopefully next time we study, we'll cover this. That there was lots of different factions. You're right. There was a lot of infighting amongst the Jews, a lot of sectarianism, and that kind of culminated in this void of strong leadership that the Romans filled, and eventually there was the revolt in the year 66, and it kind of blew over, and the temple was destroyed. But either way, the temple destruction marked a certain point in time where the Talmud says men of faith ceased.
What are you saying? Are you saying seized, S-E-I-Z-E?
Oh, yeah, C-E-A-S-E-D.
Oh,
Ceased. Sorry.
Got it.
See,
I couldn't understand what you were saying.
Ceased.
Okay, got it.
Stopped. Ended. So the Talmud says, what does it mean, men of faith? What does that mean? Anshe amanah, like emunah. What does that mean? So the Talmud says this is referring to people that don't have faith in the Almighty, or that the people that do have faith in the Almighty, those people ended, ceased. What does that mean? As it says, he who has bread in his basket and says, what will I eat tomorrow? Behold, he is from the men of limited faith. Hareze mikatne amana. If someone has bread in their basket today, you have food to eat today, and you say, what am I going to eat tomorrow? That's a person of limited faith. Right? People that have bread today, and they don't worry about tomorrow. I have bread today. Do you mind to take care of tomorrow? Those are men of faith, and that ceased at the time of the destruction of the temple. So we really could take this in two ways. We could say, number one, hey, look, if you have food today, if you're taking care of today, and you're worrying about tomorrow, we rely on God. God gave you enough for today. Well, don't worry about it. He'll worry about tomorrow. Right? It's a certain lapse, a certain flaw, a certain lacking in faith. Right? That's a legitimate takeaway. What's the other takeaway?
Well, we have seen so many people who had bread today, but tomorrow starve to death. Right?
Yeah,
So
that's a literal
it's-
thing.
Yeah, it's a legitimate worry.
Okay.
Who doesn't have an IRA?
I think it has to do with lack of trust.
Okay, but
There's a lack of trust in God that He would provide. They lost that because they see that the temple was destroyed, so they could take away their food.
so there was
as
a
well.
crisis of faith in that. Okay, but is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's clearly presented as a negative thing.
Yeah.
And perhaps could we argue, that if we have bread in our basket today, we ought not worry about tomorrow. Is that the takeaway? Why not?
Be appreciative of what you have.
Well, for sure we're appreciative of that. The question is, should I worry at all? What am I going to feed my kids tomorrow if I have food for today?
Yeah.
Yes.
We would.
But wait, the Talmud seems to say that that's a lack of faith.
Well, maybe it is, but it's
You have
reality.
responsibility to care for yourself as well as helping your neighbor.
Okay, but maybe I should rely on God.
And
Well, you
that's,
ask God for food again for tomorrow.
Bring it on.
We don't know if we'll be around tomorrow. So you say that we shouldn't worry about tomorrow.
Yeah.
We shouldn't worry about it, but we can take personal responsibility and plan for it.
correct.
Okay, so it's very interesting because the words of the Talmud, it says Ve'omer, and he says, someone who says, not someone who worries or asks. It's not so clear. There's a little bit room for ambiguity as to what exactly is this quality of lack of faith. But either way, I'm saying I said, listen, this is the level of faith, whatever that may be. But if someone's saying, listen, I have food today, I'm not thinking about tomorrow, I'm not worried about tomorrow, I'm not doing anything about tomorrow, I'm not saying what I'm going to eat tomorrow. That's a certain level of faith. And that's a level of faith that is not for us. Why? Because the Talmud itself says that stopped at a certain point. It wasn't demanded of subsequent generations. It's not something that we're capable of it's not something we're capable of that. We're not going to have that same relationship with God where it's so real and God's so involved with us on an individual level that we're going to say, what do you mean? If your dad was a billionaire If you Dow a billionaire, you have food for today. You didn't see, you open the cupboard, it's empty. Right? If your dad was a billionaire, you lived in this massive mansion, and you have food today, and the cupboard's empty. Would you be worried?
No.
You wouldn't be worried, right? So if we really had that kind of real, tangible relationship with God, we wouldn't be worried. Right. We wouldn't. But that's not a level of the world. That realism in spirituality is something that we're not there. It existed before the temple. It was people actually had that kind of relationship, and maybe it's something that we should know about. It's an ideal that we should recognize that it is possible theoretically to reach that level of faith. But for us, if we don't have food in our cupboard for tomorrow, we don't have the level of faith to say, it's God's responsibility. My dad's a billionaire. Let him worry about it. Why should I worry about the food? You know. If my kids walked into the cupboard and didn't see food, they wouldn't be worried at all because they know that their parents are going to take care of them. Right? We don't have that same kind of real relationship with God, and that's okay. That's a level that we can know about, we can maybe strive to achieve. We probably won't achieve it because even the Talmud says it's not for people post-temple period. You know, when the temple was around, the idea of God was so much more present and in people's consciousness. That's something you could expect of people. Today, not so much.
So is that considered a bad thing?
Well, I think it's a reality. It's a reality.
Yeah,
it's a certain
good or bad.
Yes, it's a reality, and it's unfortunate that we cannot have that level anymore. And it's remarkable that people did have the kind of relationship. You know, like I said, they really saw God as their father, who was a billionaire. The cupboard's empty. I'm not worried about it. They had that relationship, and that's remarkable. And that's something that maybe we could reclaim in some capacity. But I think for our discussion, what it also points out is that that's something that ended at a point almost 2,000 years ago.
Would you consider that the people in pre the temple destruction, not only Jews but everybody, being more superstitious than they are today?
More superstitious? Well, yes, you had a lot of people that were superstitious.
I mean, everybody's superstitious in one way or another, but.
And if you're not superstitious, maybe you're like a little stitious.
Yes, something like that.
Yes, I think that's for sure true among the non-Jews. The Torah says the Torah itself says Tamim tiyeh Hashem lekecha. We don't believe in superstitions, and it says you shouldn't believe in superstitions. You believe in God. It's not just like we don't believe in deja vu or if you see, the Talmud says if you see like a black cat crossing and walking over, like people had these weird superstitions. If you saw like a deer crossing over a loaf of bread, you wouldn't eat the bread. All those things are it's the nonsense that people believe. And that's not. We don't believe that. The Talmud says, or the Torah says, you should. It's a mitzvah in the Torah to not believe, and don't try to figure out the cosmos, what's going to be the future. Don't overthink the thing. Right? It says, tamim tihiyah Hashem lekech. You should be tamim. What's the word for tamim? You should be. I don't know. I can't think of the right word. You shouldn't. Don't try to overthink things. Right? You should be honest or something like that. Not the right word. Be pleasant with God, or just be. Don't be.
Trusting.
Be trusting. Not the best translation.
By the way, deja vu is not a good example because there's a rational reason for deja vu.
Maybe there is.
Well, it has to do with coming into one side of the brain and seeing on the other, and it's a time thing. Yeah, it's a real phenomenon.
Interesting. Let's move on here. I have a whole bunch of stuff. We didn't even get into this topic. I know Dan's nervous we didn't cover it. I once made this Dvar Torah. I kind of had this. My wife told me, Chaya told me, like, don't tell the story. I said, I'll tell it. We can have this. So I once. I was with my family. It was over. I think it was Passover, and I said a Dvar Torah. I said a Torah thought, Torah idea, and it caused great controversy in our family. We have a statement in the Mishnah in Chapters of the Fathers. It says if there's no Torah study, there's no derech eretz, there's no proper conduct. If there's no proper conduct, there's no Torah study. If there's no wisdom, there's no fear of God. If there's no fear of God, there's no wisdom. If there's no knowledge, there's no insight. If there's no insight, there's no knowledge. And the last thing says if there's no flour, there's no Torah. If there's no Torah, there's no flour. So I said, we have a statement here, if there's no flour, there's no Torah. Right? There's an obvious question. It should have said, if there's no bread, there's no Torah. Right? Because all the commentators say, hey, you have to be, to really study Torah, you have to have kind of your physical kind of needs covered. So it should have said, if you have no bread, you have no Torah. Why is it if you have no flour? So they'll say, well, flour. They just said flour. But I'm saying, if the Mishnah if the Mishnah used the most correct word, it should have said there's no bread, there's no Torah. Why is it there's no flour? So I said, because when someone has flour, it means they have bread and have flour for tomorrow. To truly study Torah, to have peace of mind, to study Torah, you have to have not only bread for today, flour for tomorrow. And my brother jumped on me. It was great. With some family fireworks. Because, what do you mean? If you had bread today, if you have bread in your basket today, you shouldn't worry about tomorrow. You shouldn't worry about tomorrow. Rely on God. And I think that they're right, but they're wrong. They're right because ideally that is a something that that's a faith on its highest level. For us, I think the Mishnah is saying that you have to have flour as well. At least tomorrow, maybe this week's bread taken care of to have that peace of mind. Otherwise, your mind is constantly, you're going to say, believe in God, let's study Torah. And then your mind is kind of like just, going to meander towards like, what am I going to do? What am I really going to do? That kind of the peace of mind needed to study Torah, you have to have flour as well. And then, remarkably, I found in the Maharal, he actually said the same thing. So, anyhow, it was a victory for Team Walby. In Deuteronomy chapter 22, we find a interesting mitzvah. The mitzvah is you have to build a fence around your roof. It's a mitzvah in the Torah. If you should build a fence around your roof, you say a bracha. It's a mitzvah. To build a fence around your roof. You have a roof, people can fall off, build a fence. What's it telling us? It's telling us that if you don't build a fence, don't place blood. So the continuation of the verse, don't place blood in your house. You don't want to have blood in your house. You don't have kids falling off the roof and dying, God forbid, in your house. And the Chinuch, Sefer Chinuch, which is the book that gives us it's all 613 mitzvahs in the order of where they're from the Talmud, and it gives us like background to the mitzvah. So it's a very, very nice commentary that he writes as to the reason why we have the mitzvah. And I'm going to read it. I translated it. The roots of the mitzvah. What's the roots of this mitzvah? Because even though the Almighty supervises us personally, you can tell that I translated it. And all that happens to us, good or bad, is a result of His decree and His command. So he starts off with the premise. Even though God is involved, God supervises us on an individual level, and everything that we do is a result of of what He kind of has mapped out for us. And as our sages taught, there's a statement in the Talmud, a person cannot bend his finger from below unless it is thus decreed from above. So even those simple kind of actions that we do, they have kind of a godly kind of direction to them. Still, a person must guard himself from the common happenings of the world. Why? Because the Almighty built the world, created the world, and built on the foundations of nature. Right? Nature means there's rules of physics, like nature. And He decreed that fire combusts and water extinguishes a flame. And likewise, nature demands that if a large boulder falls on the head of man, that his head will be smashed. Or if a person falls from the roof of a building, he will die. The Almighty also endowed the bodies of men. This is a point that Yal brought up here. And blew into the nostrils the souls of life, capable of intelligence, to guard the body from all danger, and placed both the body and the soul in the universe, and the rules of nature will direct them and cause upon them actions. Because, this is an important sentence, because the Almighty subjugated the body of man to nature, therefore He commanded man to protect from accidents. Otherwise, if you don't build that fence around your roof, if you don't prevent yourself from accidents, nature, to whom He is subjected, will do as per the rules of nature, and if you don't protect yourself from it. So what it's telling us, the reason why we have to build a fence around the roof is because even though God is in control, God has a plan, and everything we do is subject to God's will and God's decree, still we have nature, and nature controls us. And we're in the hands of nature. And if you blindfold yourself and try to cross the freeway, or if you don't build a fence around your roof, someone probably will die. Because that's what nature says, and that's what God wants, that we should live in a world that there's rules, and we're subject to those rules. However, there will be a select few that, due to their piety and cleaving to the Almighty's ways, the King desires them, which is a verse from the Bible. So There are great. These are the great righteous from yesteryear, men of renown, like our great and holy forefathers, right? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and many of their descendants, like Daniel, Hanani, Mishael, and Azariah, famous people that we know, to whom he subjected nature to them. And he continues, and I'll skip the rest. What he's telling us is like this: God supervises us. God decrees what's going to happen to us. Yet, we could change that. If we live a life and we don't protect ourselves from accidents, accidents will happen because that's what God wants. God wants us to live in a world. He gave us the intelligence. He gave us the knowledge. He gave us the insight. He gave us the wisdom to know that certain things are dangerous. If the boulder falls on your head, if you fall off the building, you're probably going to die. Therefore, he says, and that's what he wanted, we live in nature, and then nature rules us. Nature rules us. And therefore, we have to put a fence around the roof. We have to protect ourselves from accidents. Why? Because it might be that I'm destined for 85 long, healthy, happy, and harmonious years, but I changed that by not guarding myself. Yes, there are a select few. There are the Abrahams of the world that nature is subject to them. When Abraham went into the fire, he didn't get consumed. Hanai, Mishael, and Azariah, they went into the fire, their hair wasn't singed. Right? These are people that miracles happen because nature it doesn't have control of them, they have control of nature. Now, how does that work?
Yeah, it teaches that one.
Yeah. Okay, the way that works is very simple. Very simple. Right? We're told, Istakel Baraisu Bara Alma. How did God create the world? What was the blueprint that God used to create the world? Drum roll, please.
Quantum physics?
The Torah. To create quantum physics. The Torah. The Torah predated the world, and therefore the Torah kind of is the blueprint for the world and the laws of nature. We're thrown into that world. However, we have the ability to go to the front of the line and study Torah. If someone has complete command of all of Torah, if someone is the master of Torah, then by virtue of that, they're also the master of nature. Because they can kind of supersede nature in the pecking order. Torah begot nature, and then man is under that. Man is dominated by nature. However, if man kind of is able to completely cleave to Torah and have Torah, kind of Torah be the influence of man, he kind of jumps the priority scale, and he then is control of nature.
So the Hollywood got it right when a magician somewhere gets up and says some Latin incantation and magic happens, right? Which is something against the law of nature.
Abracadabra.
Yeah. When I say magician, not like a children's holidays, but parties, but something.
I'm kind of going off a little bit on out of that, and I'm thinking about humans in nature, and how we right. Well, what about God? I mean, does he go through nature when his miracles happen? Because he doesn't organize God, because he created the rules of the world. And, you hear about the earth standing still, and they went back and they figured out, scientists figured out a day, when the earth somehow, because something happened, an asteroid or whatever came close to the earth, I don't know. But they figure out these things, and science always seems to back it up. So when God does his miracles, when he goes through, does he use the same laws?
So what's interesting is that we're told in this particular chinuch, Sefer Chinuch, he says that really miracles can happen in one of two levels. This is very interesting because what he's saying is that not when God does a miracle. God splits the sea. Who split the sea, right? The entire nation split the sea. It was a miracle for everyone. Right?
But
there's times where God does miracles, and there are times where the individual is capable of doing miracles, pulling it out of their hats. Because the individual has that higher pecking order, right? This is someone who nature is subject to them. That's the statement. That's the word.
so then it could be God just gives.
And God subjected nature to them. So we find in the Talmud, we find these discussions of individuals who resuscitated the dead, who split the sea.
Stop the sun.
Yeah, I'm saying that's because if you're on that high level, there's no big deal for you. Because nature's subject to you. It's no different than gravity working. Gravity works because gravity works because that's the way nature works. However, if you have the control of that, we have that story of David being suspended in the air. All these awesome stories. And you know what? And there's once the commentator who asked the question and says, "Listen, We make this big deal about splitting of the sea. Big deal, splitting the sea. What's the big deal? If you open the Talmud, it tells us about Pinchas ben Yair, one of the rabbis of the Talmud, who lived 1,500 years later, also split the sea. What's the big deal? Why do we mention the big deal? The Exodus from Egypt and all the miracles. It happened 1,500 years later with men that were, not half as great as Moses. That's a question that's asked by one of the commentators. And he says, of course, Moses split the sea before the Torah was given. So that's a miracle. That's a real miracle. That's God intervening with the way things are supposed to work. Once we have the Torah, it's no big deal to split the sea if you have that Torah on such a high level where you become a master of Torah and by virtue of that a master of nature. The miracle of the Exodus was that preceded the Torah.
So in answer to my question, then God can work through nature, or he can choose not to.
What we're saying over here is like that. Yes. Remember, a miracle is just a natural, a rare natural. It's an earthquake happening at the precise time. That's what a miracle is. It's something that could be understood in a natural, but having a very specific and directed and individualized application of that. If the splitting of the sea was done by virtue of an earthquake,
Right.
that's fine. The point is that it was an earthquake at precisely the right time when the Jews needed it.
So
So yes, you might understand it on a natural, or maybe it was a suspension of nature, like food raining down from heaven. That's a suspension of nature for 40 years, feeding an entire nation.
Right.
That's a suspension of nature. That's not like a natural thing.
Right.
Either way, we're presenting an alternative way of how miracles happen when nature is given in the hands of individuals who have earned it.
Okay, before you let's get back to the fence around the
Yes.
roof. Do we see these things, fences around the roof?
Have you ever seen a roof that doesn't have a fence?
Sure.
The point is a roof that people go on. The point is, the fence of the roof is an example, but it means that you don't leave dangerous things hanging around.
No, I understand that. So it's just a representative thing. I mean,
it's
we go into Williamsburg and you have all these huge fences all around.
No, it's a lot of the mitzvahs in the Torah are ones that are common sense. It's common sense to have a fence around the roof. People hanging on a roof. If you go to an apartment building that has a roof that people go on top of it, I better hope there'll be a fence. I better hope they'll have a fence. But for us, it's a mitzvah as well. Just like there's a law in the Torah not to steal, and that happened to have been adopted by many societies, thankfully, right?
Also, obviously, personal injury lawyers were around during biblical times as well, right?
They were going after people.
Yes, because before, what I've been looking up on the internet, in Israel, long ago, when it's hot, they used to sleep up in the roof.
So, in Israel, Jerusalem, it's all apartment buildings, almost all exclusively.
Actually, we took walks across. They led us across the rooftops, and
Was it dangerous?
Well, no, there were
fences around the roof.
But the point,
but they do use the roofs as part of their roof.
Well, that's a different story. But
now, maybe I made a mistake in how I started. I should have started with the more central. We still have some time. We go a little over time, a little bit. We find a disagreement in the Talmud about seeking medical help. And this is a quote from Brachos 60a. Brachos is the very first of the books of the Talmud. And if you remember last week, we talked about the Talmud in Brachos 57b. This is only a few pages later, 60a. It says as follows: "It is not the way of man to seek medical help." So what's the alternative? Rather to beseech the Almighty for mercy. Just that they so behaved, which means that before people decided to go seek medical help, the way it was, or the way it was meant to be, was that if someone got sick, they prayed to God, and that's how their healing process went. Just that people started behaving by going to seek medical profession. Therefore, that's the way it kind of developed. And now you have to go to the doctor because people kind of had this lapse of faith, and therefore the less ideal way of dealing with physical injury and disease became the standard. So that's the first opinion. It says Abaye will hold that name in your head. he says, reject that, don't say that, for they taught in the academy of Rabbi Yishmael. So remember two names. Abai is quoting from Rabbi Yishmael, and he quotes a verse in Exodus, and he shall surely heal, v'rapo yirapeh. From here we know that a doctor has permission to administer medicine. Point being that Rabbi Yishmael and reinforced by Abaye, they both say that seeking medical help is sanctioned in the Torah. In fact, the Torah itself says go to doctors. And it's not, it means even the ideal setting, it's normal, it's proper to seek out medical attention, even from the Torah's perspective. So we see once again a disagreement, and in the later commentaries they try to, they grapple with this. Are we going like this side, like this opinion, like that opinion, etc. Brachos 35b. Now listen to this. This is the I would say probably the place where we should have started. The rabbis taught. Listen to this disagreement. And you shall gather your devasafta de ganecha. That is part of the Shema, the second chapter of Shema. It says that if you do well, you're behaving this and that, you shall gather your grain. And we know in our class that the Torah is not going to tell us anything superfluous. It's not. What is the meaning? What is the reason why it needs to tell us that you gather grain? Of course, that's what people do. Of course you gather grain. Farmers gather grain. Why are you telling us that you should gather your grain? So ask the Talmud, what's the purpose of saying this? For it says, the books of Torah shall never cease from you. Right? We find a different verse that says you should never stop studying Torah. Never stop studying Torah. Perhaps that is to be interpreted literally. Never stop studying Torah, even to gather your grain. Therefore, it says you should gather your grain. You should couple with the Torah the ways of the land. You should have this blend of studying the Torah, not stopping for a second studying Torah, but also gather your grain. You have to find a way to make this marriage work. On one hand, living the life of regular personal responsibility, we would say, plus having the delving into Torah and not letting go of the Torah for a second. That's the first opinion. These are the words of Rabbi Yishmael. The first opinion is Rabbi Yishmael. The same Rabbi Yishmael told us that seeking medical help is sanctioned in the Torah. Very much what we would call today a very pragmatic approach. Personal responsibility is sanctioned by the Torah. It tells us to seek medical help. It tells us to have a job and gather our grain. Rabbi Shimon, the son of Yochai, argues. What does he say? If a person plows during the times of plowing, and plants during the season of planting, and harvests during harvest season, and grinds in grinding season, and winnows during the times of wind. Basically, he says a farmer's busy the entire year. What will become of the Torah? When is a person going to study Torah? When is a person going to study Torah? You're busy your whole time with your livelihood. Yeah, you have the tax season in April, then you have everyone files in September. And then you're doing the tax planning for the year at the end of the year. Right? You're busy the whole year. The farmer's busy the whole year. Everyone's busy the whole year. There's high season, the low season, but you're always busy. When are you going to study Torah? That's what Rabbi Shimon asks. So what's his response? Rather, when Israel is doing the will of the Almighty, then their work is done by others. If you do the work of the Almighty, you study Torah, you don't worry. God will take care of you. Your father is the billionaire. Let him worry about feeding you. Don't worry about it. That's when you're doing the will of the Almighty. And when Israel is not doing the will of the Almighty, then the work is done by themselves, and additionally, the work of others is done by them. Well, okay, yeah, maybe. Well, I have another story about Rabbi Shimon that kind of sheds light on what his perspective was. So we see a disagreement on our very matter. According to Rabbi Yishmael, he says, find this middle ground. Torah is very important. Having a responsibility is very important. You have the Torah and live a life. That's Rabbi Yishmael. Comes along Rabbi Shimon and he says, what? You're always going to be busy. You'll never study Torah. Rather, if you completely devote yourself to God, He'll watch out for you. Your work will be done by others. Don't worry about how that will happen. Says Abaye, once again the same Abaye that we quoted, many did like Rabbi Yishmael. Many people acted like Rabbi Yishmael and succeeded. like Rabbi Shimon, and did not succeed. What he's telling you is that evidence has shown, or experience has taught, that there are a lot of people that tried to do like Rabbi Shimon did, right? Tried to have this nice blend, this nice marriage, and it worked for them. And a lot of people tried to do like Rabbi Shimon, say, I'm just condemning myself to Torah study, and they did not succeed. Interestingly, he's not picking sides. What he's saying is, a lot of people tried this and worked, a lot of people tried this and it did not work. He's basically taking an experience-driven model, right? Means-tested model of saying, this seems to work more than that. It seems like he's not saying that one of them is more legitimate. He's saying one of them just happens to work better than the other one.
There was something about, where did I read it? It was either Talmud or actually in Deuteronomy about limiting the amount of work in order to study the Torah.
Oh, Maimonides says, listen, everyone has to work. Gotta work. And you should work at least 3 hours a day and study the rest of the other 9. That's what he says. The Maharshal, one of the primary commentaries on the Talmud, what he tells us, I think, is very crucial to understanding kind of what it means for us. This Rabbi Shimon that we quoted, so you said welfare. There's a Rabbi Shimon is one of the pivotal characters in the Talmud. He lived under Roman oppression, and there's this great story about him, actually kind of basically the story of his life, where, this is, I'm quoting, I'll read it from Hebrew and I'll kind of translate as we go along. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Yossi, and Rabbi Shimon were talking, and there were a bunch of other people that were listening to the conversation. And Rabbi Yehuda started off by saying, how beautiful are the actions of these Roman hosts. He's saying, look, they built markets, they built bridges, they established bathhouses. We know the Romans, when they come in, they organized things, they updated everything, they built the roads, they built the infrastructure. And Rabbi Yossi was listening there, he was quiet, he didn't say anything. And Rabbi Shimon, he says, what do you mean? Everything they did, they did for their own benefit. They built marketplaces so they could have, brothels. They built bathhouses so they could just they could just kind of pleasure themselves. They built bridges so they could collect taxes. That's what they had this conversation about the merits of the Romans. And there were other people listening to them. One guy said, I just heard Rabbi Shimon bad-mouthing the Romans. I'm going to go tell the Romans. He went and told the Romans, and they said, Rabbi Yehuda, the first one who praised the Romans, he's going to be elevated, so he got a position. Rabbi Yossi, who was quiet, who didn't kind of agree or didn't sign off on this praise, he's going to be sent to exile. And Rabbi Shimon, who spoke negatively about the Romans, he's going to be executed. And he ran away, and he ended up in a Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, where did he end up in?
Cave, wasn't it?
Booyah. He ended up in a cave.
13 years.
That's right. So what happened? This is the Talmud describing the cave. It says, they were sitting submerged in, it was him and his son, Rabbi Elazar. They were sitting submerged in sand. The entire day were studying. How did they eat? So a stream of water just appeared outside their cave, and a carob tree as well just sprouted up outside. They just ate from the carobs and drank from the water, and that's how they survived for 12 years. They came out after 12 years, and they saw people that were just fooling around, wasting time. So they said, "You guys are taking the eternal world and you're neglecting it. And you're just spending time once in a while, and then just everything just turned on fire. Everything like everything they looked at just went ablaze. So someone said so this kind of message was relayed to them. You guys are destroying the whole world. Get back to your cave. So they went back to the cave after 12 months. And they came in after 12 months, and they saw a guy who was walking with two with basically two flowers before Shabbos, and he said to him, "Why do you have to have two flowers? You have just one." He says, "One of them is to remember Shabbos, one of them is to guard Shabbos." So I said, "Oh, we could live in this world." That's the story. Rabbi Shimon spent 13 years of his life living in a cave, relying totally on God. His perspective is clearly one that he personally embodied. And it's something that he demanded of others as well, and he had a hard time seeing others wasting their time. For him, it was very legitimate to say, listen, do God's will, God will take care. And says that a lot of people tried that, but they didn't succeed, not because it was not legitimate, because they weren't holding at that level where they could have that total reliance on God, and God will reciprocate with providing for them. They couldn't just say, I'm living in the cave, whatever happens, and then, and just totally relying on God. A lot of people tried it. It didn't work for them. A lot of people tried what Rabbi Shmuel did, and most people are yes, they could have this kind of coexistence of personal responsibility and taking care of their spiritual responsibilities as well. That is something that is capable, that we could demand of the average fellow. And I think that that's really a good place to kind of, a good perspective to take away from this whole discussion. Yes, we look at someone like Joseph. Joseph, at his level, any sort of reliance on any individual is something which, to him, with his level of faith that he was capable of or that he had, it's something that is a mistake on his part. Someone like Rabbi Shimon, he was able to live a life, just rely on God. Don't worry about anything else. You don't have to go to the doctor. It's all God trying to just give you messages. Listen to the messages. Total reliance on God, and He'll take care of you. For most of us, we take the words of Rabbi Shmuel, right? We take this kind of middle ground. Yes, we cannot say, well, I'll rely on miracles and God will take care of us. We have to make sure that our responsibilities are filled. Right? We have to have this coexistence of our spiritual and our physical lives. And we're told, Moses, on the footsteps of the Red Sea, he starts praying to God. Right? They're faced with basically annihilation. They have the armed Egyptians coming after them, and they're faced with the sea. And Moses starts praying. And God says, why are you praying now? Now's not a time for prayer. Now is a time for action. Right? That's also a perspective that even for Moses, there's times for us to say, listen, I need to do something. God expects me to do something. We don't believe in the partnership word that you said at the beginning. We don't believe that God just has this plan and we're just kind of filling in the dots. We're partners with God in the plan. We're creators as well.
Co-creators.
Hashamayim, shamayim laHashem, v'ha'aretz nasan livnei adam. The heavens are for God, the land is for us. Right? That can mean a lot of different things, and it's used in Jewish literature in a lot of different ways. But one of the ways that we use is that, yes, there's this coexistence. There's God doing godly things in this spiritual realm, and there's our responsibility on this world. And this world is ours, and we can decide, we can make the most of it. Our actions matter, our actions have impact. And those two things of having that relationship with God from the heavens and our responsibility from earth, those things together, for us, I think, is a very healthy outlook. Lastly, I wanted to share my grandfather's perspective on this because he kind of turns the issue on its head. He says a lot of people, when they talk about faith in God, relying on God, they're making a huge mistake. If you feel like you're giving up anything by saying I'm relying on God, if it's a leap for you, it says, I don't know what to do. I'm all nervous. Okay, I'll rely on God. If there's any sort of feeling that like you're being different than what is natural, that's not faith in God. Faith in God means that you actually have this relationship where that's normal. If someone actually has faith, they don't know it. Because then that's just the reality. If you think, you know what? I'm going to give up on that, or I'm going to not rely. I'm going to rely on God. Like you make a decision to do that. That's not relying on God. That's playing the lottery. That's hoping. Relying on God means that it's a relationship where that's a reality. I'm not giving up. I'm not forfeiting anything. That's just the reality of my relationship. I'm doing what feels natural to me. Faith, and in this particular discussion of the interplay, the interface between faith and personal responsibility, as you grow, as you develop as a spiritual being, your relationship with God will become more natural, and it will feel very natural to pray when you need something. And that's where you're holding. And you won't feel like, I'm going to do an act of faith now. It won't feel out of character, right, to act in a faithful way, because that's just who you are. That's not something which is any sort of leap or any sort of level that you're trying to ascend to, or just for the moment. It feels very normal. And as you grow, your reliance or this balance will grow or will develop as well. I think that's a healthy kind of conclusion for us. That yes, we didn't really take any sides, and we saw perspectives from both matters. And I think that both of them have legitimacy, because it kind of depends on where we are. For someone to say, listen, how could I give 10% of my money to charity? 10%, you know how much that is? 10%. You know what it makes my tax bracket? For that person, well, they're not holding at the level of faith where that's demanded of them. It should feel very natural. In fact, the Talmud says that there's one thing that God says, this is something you can test me on. Nothing else can you test me on. Nothing else. But I say, aser b'shvil shetit asher, right? Give 10% of your money to charity in order that you become wealthy. And this is something that I guarantee it. And I guarantee it, I want you to test me on it. And I don't know anyone that has regretted any charity that they've given. But for a lot of people, I had a great, this is great. I had this is one of a really, really close friend of mine, one of my students. And I said, when he comes to the dinner, we made a dinner this past week. So when he comes to dinner, he's like, well, he doesn't want to. He told me, I don't support your cause. I don't support your cause. We had asked him for a gift, and he said, no. Basically, what he told me, I don't support your cause. And I was very disheartened, because I was very close with him, very friendly with him. And he told me he's going to give me this amount of money. I don't want to say the amounts of money. I'll give you this. And I was really disheartened by that. And then I realized it's not that my cause he doesn't support, it's that he never had an education of what it means to give charity. So I met him actually on Friday. I said to him, we had a very nice hour-and-a-half long meeting, but I asked him, I said, what causes do you support? Like what do you support? So he said, well, actually, when there was this tsunami, he gave $50. So I said to him, look how much this is something that you say you support, but you pledge to us more than that. So you do support us. It's just that you need to learn that when you give charity, God will provide you back. You do indeed support us. You do indeed support us, and that's remarkable. We just proved that you pledged to give us more than you gave to what you claimed that you support. It's just that as you grow in faith, it's not a big deal, to give 10%. Like the people that actually do that, it's not a leap. It's not a leap because they're holding at that level, that point, at that juncture in their spiritual development. So I think that's a good way to look at it, let's try to do acts of faith that are in line with what we feel like, And as we grow, as we develop our spiritual sensitivities, things will feel more and more natural, and that's something that and our needle moves up. That's my perspective, and thank you all for listening. And happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Next week we're off, and we'll see y'all in 2 weeks.
Happy Thanksgiving, bud.
Thank you.
Do we know what's the topic in 2 weeks?
Yes, we have 2 back-to-back weeks of history, part 4 and part 5.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Hey.
Jonah.
Hey.
Jonah.
Jonah. Hey, nice to meet you. How you doing? Thank you. Come back.
Yeah, it's the second time.
I know you've seen me before. Yeah.
Yeah, I came once before, and then
It's
this
good.
is one I couldn't come. Oh, I did.